The morning I realized my parents wanted me dead, I was lying at the bottom of the staircase with a broken wrist and the taste of copper on my tongue, listening to my mother whisper to my father from the top of the stairs. Did it work? 3 words. That's all it took to shatter 26 years of believing I was loved. My name is Cassie Harlow, and this is the story of how the only person in my family who ever truly wanted me alive was an 81-year-old man named Grandpa Ned, a man my parents spent 15 years trying to keep me away from, a man who smelled like pine shavings and peppermints and always had a joke ready before you even finished saying hello. A man whose will, it turned out, was worth more than my parents thought my life was. Let me back up. Grandpa Ned wasn't actually my grandfather by blood. He was my father's stepfather, a distinction my father never let anyone forget, as if diluting the connection somehow diminished whatever obligation he owed the old man. But Ned had married my grandmother Elena when my father was 9 years old, had raised him through high school, paid for his college, walked him down the aisle when my grandmother passed before the wedding. Ned had done everything a father does, and my father had spent the better part of his adult life collecting that debt and resenting every penny of it. Ned had made his money the quiet way, decades of farmland in rural Ohio that nobody thought was worth much until a highway developer came knocking in 2003. He never flaunted it. He drove a 1994 pickup truck with a crack in the windshield. He wore the same flannel shirts he'd owned since the 90s. His house sat on 12 acres outside of a small town called Millhaven, and the closest thing to luxury he owned was a riding lawnmower he'd named Gerald. But the estate, when whispers of its value began circulating through family conversations I wasn't supposed to overhear, was estimated somewhere north of $4 million. $4 million. To my parents, 2 people who had spent their lives making average incomes and spectacular bad financial decisions, that number was not just money. It was a finish line, a solution to every problem they'd ever created for themselves. The only obstacle was me. Grandpa Ned had told me something when I was 12 years old, sitting on his porch during one of our rare unsupervised visits. He'd pressed a butterscotch candy into my palm and looked at me with those steady gray eyes of his and said, "Cassie Bird, when I'm gone, I want you taken care of. Your father's going to be fine. Men like your father always land on their feet, but you're going to need a soft place to fall." I didn't understand it then. I was 12. I was more interested in whether I could sneak a second butterscotch. But he'd had his lawyer draw up a will that left a significant portion of his estate, roughly 60%, directly to me, bypassing my father entirely. The remaining 40 went to various charities and a small bequest to his neighbor, a widow named June who brought him casseroles every Thursday. My parents found out about this, 3 years ago. I know this because that's precisely when everything changed. The shift was subtle at first. The way cold weather comes in, you don't notice the degrees dropping until suddenly you're shivering and you can't remember when you stopped being warm. My mother started calling more, not warm calls, investigative calls, questions about my health, my plans, whether I'd updated my own will, whether I had one at all. My father started inviting me to dinner regularly, which was unprecedented. He'd spent most of my childhood treating me like background noise. They suggested I move back home to save money. I was 24 and had my own apartment, a job I liked, a life that was small but mine. But they were persistent, and I'm almost ashamed to admit this, still hungry for their approval in the way that children of cold parents always are. You keep reaching for the warmth even after you've been burned enough times to know better. So I moved back home. Looking back, I can trace the architecture of what they were building. The life insurance policy they encouraged me to take out just for peace of mind, with my father listed as beneficiary because I was young and didn't have a spouse. The slow erosion of my outside friendships, which they managed through a combination of monopolizing my time and subtle, consistent undermining of anyone I was close to. The financial dependence they cultivated by encouraging me to quit my job and help my mother with her small business, a candle-making venture that never made a single sale. By the time I was 26, I was isolated, financially dependent, and living in a house where the staircases were steep and the floors were hardwood, and nobody would have been surprised if a young woman in socks had simply slipped. Grandpa Ned called me every Sunday. My parents hated it. They'd hover near wherever I took the call, and afterward my mother would always find something critical to say about him. He was getting senile. He didn't know what he was saying half the time. Had I noticed how confused he'd seemed? He didn't seem confused to me. He seemed like Ned, sharp and funny and warm in that quiet, undemonstrative way of men from his generation who expressed love through consistency rather than words. He always asked about my week in specific terms, not "how are you," but "did you ever finish that book you were telling me about?" or "how did that doctor's appointment go?" He remembered everything. "You sound tired, Cassie Bird," he told me one Sunday, about 3 months before the staircase. "I'm okay," I said automatically. A pause. "Are you sure you're okay, or are you just saying that because someone's listening?" I looked up. My mother was pretending to water a plant 6 feet away. "Little of both," I said. Another pause, longer this time. "I see," he said quietly. "Well, you know where I am." The night it happened was a Tuesday in November. I'd overheard an argument between my parents that I wasn't meant to hear, something about timing, about Ned's declining health, about how they couldn't wait much longer because he might change the will again and they'd lose everything. My mother's voice had a specific quality when she was frightened, a high, tight sharpness, and that night it was so sharp it could have cut glass. I was at the top of the stairs when my father came out of the bedroom. I have replayed the moment so many times that I can no longer be certain which details are memory and which are reconstruction. What I know is this: his hands were on my back. I was falling. The stairs were unforgiving, and the hardwood floor at the bottom was more so. I broke my wrist catching myself, cracked 2 ribs, hit my head hard enough to see white. And from somewhere above me, through the ringing in my ears, I heard my mother's voice. "Did it work?" They were very helpful after that, solicitous in the way that guilty people are too much, too quickly, hovering with ice packs and concerned faces. My father said I must have slipped. My mother said she'd told me not to wear socks on the stairs. They did not take me to the hospital. My mother, who had once taken a first aid course, declared that my wrist was probably just sprained and wrapped it in an ace bandage. They gave me painkillers from an old prescription and put me to bed. And sometime around 2 in the morning, when the painkillers had worn off and the pain in my wrist had clarified into something that told me it was most certainly not a sprain, I lay in the dark and understood with absolute cold certainty what my parents were. I thought about Grandpa Ned saying, "You know where I am." At 3 in the morning I got up. I found my phone. I called him. He answered on the second ring, because Ned never slept well and kept his phone on the nightstand, and when I told him what had happened, all of it, the argument I'd overheard, the hands on my back, the question from the top of the stairs, he didn't say a word until I was finished. Then he said, "Cassie Bird, I need you to listen to me very carefully. Can you drive?" "I think so." "Then I need you to get in your car right now, tonight, and come to me. Don't pack. Don't say goodbye. Don't let them hear you leave. Just come." I went. I drove 4 hours with a broken wrist. I know that now, confirmed by the ER doctor in Millhaven, who set it the following morning, because Grandpa Ned had stayed on the phone with me for every single mile, talking about nothing important, just keeping his voice in my ear so I wouldn't be alone in the dark. He met me at the door in his flannel robe and his slippers, this small, solid 81-year-old man, and when I got out of the car, he took one look at my face and opened his arms, and I walked into them and cried like I hadn't cried since I was a child. "I've got you," he said. "You're safe now." The next morning, he drove me to the police station himself, sitting in the plastic chair next to mine while I gave my statement to a detective who had the good grace to write everything down without looking skeptical. Ned had already called his lawyer from the house. The lawyer met us there. My parents were questioned within the week. The investigation took months. There was no confession, there rarely is, but there was the life insurance policy, And there was the recorded phone call my parents hadn't known Ned had kept when my father called him 8 months earlier, suggesting that Ned reconsider the arrangement regarding the will, that it was causing family tension. There was a neighbor who had seen my father's car parked outside a pharmacy where he'd filled a prescription for someone that nobody in the house officially needed. It was enough, not for a criminal conviction. The law is a difficult instrument, and proving intent in a staircase accident is not simple, but it was enough for a civil suit. It was enough to ensure I never had to go back. Grandpa Ned passed 8 months after that November night, in the July that smelled like cut grass, and his riding lawnmower Gerald sat quiet in the barn. He went in his sleep, in his own bed, which is the death he wanted. He had updated his will 3 weeks after I arrived at his door. I won't tell you what he left me, because that's not the point of this story. The point is what he said to his lawyer when he signed the updated documents, which the lawyer told me afterward with the slightly watery eyes of a man who had seen a lot of wills in his career, and not all of them made him feel this way. Ned had looked at the papers and said, "That girl drove 4 hours in the middle of the night with a broken wrist because she trusted me. That's not something you put a number on, but you do your best. I have a small house now. I have a job I like again. I have friends I've slowly rebuilt, the way you rebuild things that were carefully dismantled piece by piece with patience. I still have the last voicemail Ned left me from the Sunday before he died. He'd called while I was in the garden, and I'd missed it. I've listened to it more times than I can count. Just checking in, Cassie Bird. No news, just wanted to hear your voice. You don't have to call back, I just like knowing you're out there." Some people come into your life and hold it together with both hands without ever making a fuss about it. Grandpa Ned was that person for me. And for whatever years I have left, I intend to be that person for someone else. If you're in a situation that feels unsafe, trust the instinct that tells you something is wrong. You don't need proof. You don't need permission. You just need to go.